I'm going to walk you through on how to preserve your wealth and make sure and protect your wealth against your children and future generations, to make sure that they don't squander it away, or make sure that that wealth that you've created for your children doesn't get into the wrong hands. And what do I mean by that? Well, I had a disaster that happened to me. And because of that disaster, if my dad knew how to preserve wealth, such as I do, this whole disaster of my sister taking everything would never have happened. Or what about my friend's father who had a fortune, several billion, and somehow when the father dies, it gets divided between a number of children, and those children have to pay estate tax. So how could the father have avoided all that estate tax? The fact is that their company, they had to go public in their company just to pay the estate tax. I'm going to walk you through on how to preserve your wealth. Now, I'm not selling a service. I'm simply giving you the blueprints on how to do that. You could be a millionaire, you could be a billionaire, or a trillionaire. It doesn't matter who you are. But I want to walk you through different scenarios of how those people could have preserved their wealth. Now, I'm not an accountant, I'm not an estate planner, I'm a doctor of finance, and I studied risk management because part of financial trading and hedge fund selection is risk management. It's all about managing risk. And so part of managing your risk, once you do have wealth, you need to know how to preserve it and to protect yourself. And so part of private foundations and trusts, you have to know exactly how to do it. Going to your lawyer, your son-in-law who's a lawyer, or your sister-in-law, or your relative, and you're putting trust into them, just because someone's a lawyer or a doctor or finance, it doesn't mean that they know really what to do on how to preserve wealth. That takes a lot of understanding and a lot of research, trial and error, understanding why Henry Ford created a private foundation over 100 years ago. Why do we have the Rothschilds family, so famous throughout history? And they know how to preserve wealth. It's not that they're doing magic. They created a private foundation. What about the Vanderbilts? Mr. Cornelius Vanderbilt and his son Billy, they created a fortune, but by the third generation, all of that wealth, it was squandered away between marriages, gambling. The fourth generation gambled it away. That's why Anderson Cooper isn't worth billions, because his grandfather was an alcoholic and a gambler. And so when his grandfather inherited the 90 million at the turn of the century, he had too much freedom of all that wealth, such as Anderson Cooper's great-grandfather at the turn of the 1890s. Remember the 1890s of Manhattan real estate? How many beautiful mansions went up on Fifth Avenue? It's called Billionaire Row. Or there's other cities. In Long Island, we have so many mansions that have gone up of all this wealth. But yet, the heirs to that wealth, many generations later, or even one generation later, they're not rich. And this is because we all have personalities, okay? You have an artist personality, you have a gambler personality, you have the studious personality, you have the frugal personality, okay? So just right there, you could be extremely cheap and think that you're going to save every penny. But that doesn't mean anything. Because what if you're married to someone and they get a divorce from you and they take half? For example, in Nevada, if you get married to someone while they're drunk, the moment that you sign that agreement, you own half of what they have. Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania, and many other states in our country, that's how it is. And so how can you preserve that wealth if you're the one that made it or you're the one that inherited it? Now, if you go to, let's say, a trust company, they're going to give you their advice on what they know, but does that work? Well, if they own a trust company, then why aren't they marketing this idea out to thousands of people? Or attorneys specialize in wills, estates, and trusts. Why aren't they selling these packages to the people, the clients that they know? Or why is it when I was in the real estate career, I would meet real estate owners in Manhattan. I met those owners. And some of them, they were actually very smart to a certain degree. They would create an LLC for their property. And of course, some of them were smart. They created a private trust. Some created private foundations. But people really don't understand the value in a private foundation and what you need to do to protect that private foundation for the future generations. Now, this is not being about selfish and only caring about your generation or your life. For example, I had met an owner in Manhattan. It was actually my first exclusive agreement to sell his loft building. It was a 10-story loft building. In 2002, he was asking $10 million for it. Now, it was in his name. I can't tell you the name. It's a prominent name. And I says to myself, so of course I had to ask him, how did he start his career? Because I love knowing that. And he was in construction. And what I concluded is that he had the experience on how to manage construction projects, but he didn't know how to protect himself legally. And when, I valued his estate, I knew how much he owned because, it's in the book, and I knew the properties that he owned. I couldn't believe he had $50 million worth of Manhattan real estate still in his name. That doesn't make any sense. You're supposed to create what? A private foundation in another country that has very, very stringent constitution. And that would be either Belize today or Luxembourg. So you want to create a private foundation in Luxembourg. Now, there's a reason for that. So, in other words, the properties that my client owned, they should have been in its own LLC, and you name it the address of the property. It would be, that's the address, let's say, and it would be 15 Cherry Hill Lane, LLC. And the owner, remember, the owner of that LLC, the owner would be the private foundation in Belize or Luxembourg. Now, this is very important. You still have control over your assets. However, if you punch someone like Will Smith did this past weekend, well, that guy who he slapped, that's considered an assault. And you could actually be arrested for that. Now, I'm shocked he wasn't arrested for it. Now, I'm sure they're going to settle out of court. But what if that guy, the host of the Oscars, decides to sue? Well, whatever Will Smith has in his name, he could lose it. And that's scary. Or what happens when Will Smith's wife, the narcissist, divorces him? She's going to take half. Or, for example, Harry Windsor, Prince Harry as you know him, he married Meghan Markle. whatever the situation is, that's a really dangerous situation. You have a narcissist, Megan, and you have the husband, Harry, that's willing to do anything to make her happy. That's a wonderful person, but he's getting abused, and he's going to get abused because in the state of California, when you get a divorce, what happens to your estate? You have to share it with your wife or your husband. That's not right. His mother, Princess Diana, gave him a lot of money. What about his children or future generations? Didn't they care about that? Well, if they would have created a private foundation, it would have been protected. Now, of course, I want to walk you through a foundation that was set up, and I admire the royal family of England because I'm going to tell you why they're still rich. Whatever it is, $500 million, $1 billion. But the fact is that Queen Victoria's mother was a gambler. And she witnessed the mother selling the silver. When I'm talking about silver, I mean the utensils, the beautiful objects that you have at the dinner table. Back in those days, the etiquette was a different story, and people were different. But the fact is that she witnessed that, and she became poor. The uncle had built Buckingham Palace and furnished it, etc. And he died at such abruptly that she became the Queen Victoria. And because her mother was a gambler, she made sure that would never happen to her again, because it actually happened to her. So in my case, because my sister took everything and dumped my mother in the street with an eviction notice out of my parents' house, this is what a disgrace she is. I witnessed this, and when I went to school, I wanted to learn everything possible. So Queen Victoria created a trust, the Royal Trust. And in the Royal Trust, the next generation, they can't just sell the house. They can't just give the painting away to the mistress. The person that they married, when they get married, they can't sue for divorce and take half. Or what about Harry? Is he going to lose half? Or what about the Gates family? If Bill Gates had created that private foundation when he was younger, his wife would have never been able to take half. Or what about the owner of Tesla? What was it, 250 billion that he's worth 10 years later? Well, if his wife sues him, or he gets sued because he may be driving down the street and a baby may be passing him. What if he hits that baby? What if he's driving drunk? Well, you could guarantee he's going to lose a lot. Or what happens when your father dies? And in my case, my own father, he should have created a private foundation in the 60s, because whatever he actually accumulated, he would have still had it. Instead, he got sued by someone. There's many scenarios that happen. Well, what about your own sibling? When your father dies or your mother dies and there's a will, everyone gets divided up to 5 people, well, that money is going to be gone. For example, my mother's father died, and my mother has several sisters and brothers. If the wealth has been put into a private foundation, that wealth would still be there and it would be earning interest. And all the people, my mother's brothers and sisters, would have been getting a pension. It wasn't a lot of money, but it's still a lot because that money's gone. My sister took that as well. Now, once you create your private foundation, you need to put in the private foundation a constitution. I call it a constitution. It's not that legal name. It's a document that states what you're allowed to do. you need to protect your future generations. Or what happens if you go brain dead tomorrow? Or what happens if you get into a car accident and you can't think for yourself? That's dangerous. And so what you need to do is, in that document, I call it the Constitution. In the Constitution, you have to write, there is no liens that can be attached to the private foundation. In other words, what if you have a wife such as Leona Helmsley? Leona Helmsley took Harry Helmsley's fortune, he had a wife, and she took him away from his wife and his kids. And when Leona Helmsley died, she left it to her cat. She left a fortune to her cat. So again, mentally ill, maybe Alzheimer's. And so you have to protect yourself against that. You have to protect your future generations against that. For example, Anderson Cooper's grandfather, he was a gambler. He gambled everything away. He inherited $80 million at the turn of the century, and his mother, there was a trust for her of $5 million in 1920s approximately. But just because you create a trust, did they create that Constitution document, as I call it? Did they put into that trust that you cannot borrow against the trust? You cannot put a lien against the trust. You cannot donate the assets to charitable, whatever it is. What if you have a Mother Teresa type in the future generations? Or let's say that you're married and your wife is like a Mother Teresa, and she wants to give the private foundation away to charity. Well, if you put in the document that you're not allowed to squander away the wealth, you must preserve it, or that you're not allowed to give to charity, or you're not allowed to take more than 10% out per year. So these are all questions that you need to tell the trust company. You are the one that's required to do that. So if you want a really good trust company, I'll even tell you that. It's in Chicago and it's called Northern Trust. I like Northern Trust because they're a big company and they're reputable and they have a lot of experience. But it's up to you to tell Northern Trust that you want a private foundation in either Belize or Luxembourg. And in that private foundation, you don't want a charitable foundation. You're not giving anything away. You are preserving your wealth for future generations. Now, even if you're worth $1 billion or $100 billion or $1 trillion, you think that's a lot of money, right? Well, unfortunately, look what happened to the Vanderbilts. Cornelius Vanderbilt in the 1800s, his son inherits the money, doubles it, Billy Vanderbilt. It was millions back then. But unfortunately, sometimes things happen where the people managing the trust or the money, they're not savvy enough to understand how to manage it. And so the third generation, actually the second generation, Billy, he put the money into bonds. That's not what you do. You don't buy paper. You invest in real estate to generate income. And if you don't want to generate income because you don't want to, participate in owning an apartment building, then you could buy land. But you have to remember with the land, you have to pay the tax on it. So you need to generate income to preserve it. That's why real estate investments such as apartment buildings, and if you want to be a Mother Teresa type, well, you could go into the city where you live or multiple cities, depending on how much money you have, and you could create those homeless shelters. Or, for example, if my friend, the owner of a printing press, if his father created a private foundation, immediately his wife wouldn't have been able to take half in the divorce. They still stayed married after that. Simply, she was a control freak, and she was a monster, worse than Joan Crawford. Of course, she married into old money, an old family with a lot of money, and my friend's father was a very successful businessman as well, and he created a fortune for himself. Well, where's that money today? The father died abruptly. He was either murdered or he drowned in 2 feet of water. Then the mother, control freak, she puts the younger brother as a CEO who had no real capability of managing an estate. What does he do? He sells DHL, the shipping company. So wait a second. We are approaching the year 2000 when we have the computer era starting, right? People are no longer buying magazines such as Architectural Digest. That was the magazine that they would print, or the Times magazine, or multiple magazines. It's a special type of magazine that requires a vivid color. And my friend's father was the one responsible for making that invention. Now, what's interesting is, so in other words, the younger brother takes over. And because the father didn't create a private foundation, the mother dies and they have to pay estate taxes. They had to go public to generate enough money to pay the estate taxes. So why is it a family that's worth $8 billion the father was worth $4 billion and the mother was worth $4 billion. She's also responsible for the kid's doll. It's the little doll that the little girls go to the tea parties with. I don't know the name of it, but she made $1 billion on that. Where's all that money today? Well, again, if the father had created a private foundation, and in that private foundation, make a constitution, as I call it. It's not really a constitution, it's just an important document that outlines what you're allowed to do. In other words, if you sell an asset such as a piece of real estate, well, you have to say what you're allowed to do with the money. You have to reinvest it in another piece of real estate. Or you're not allowed you're not allowed to put a lien against the private foundation, or you're not allowed to borrow against the foundation. What if your child gets married to a monster? Unfortunately, very rich people, they have this problem. You have these gold diggers out there that they'll be so sweet for 20, 30 years. And then once you drop dead, and your daughter or your son gets the wealth, that's when they become monsters. But by then, they've been doing everything, they've been controlling everything, that your daughter will not have anything. Look at what happened to my family. Look at what happened to my mother. She was thrown out of her own house with an eviction notice by her own daughter, because my sister wanted everything. She took my grandfather's money as well. Of course, my mother, again, she wasn't very good with money. Well, unfortunately, you're going to have those type of people in the future, in future generations. Because not everyone is an entrepreneur. Not everyone is going to be frugal with the money. Some people are like Princess Diana or Mother Teresa that want to give it away to charitable foundations. Does the money really go to where it has to go? No, it doesn't. And so that's why you're better off helping your future generations with that money. Because if they all had a pension and they all shared that future wealth, well, think about how many thousands of families could do the same thing. Think about over 100 years, How many families out there made more than $1 million? Or what about my other friend? His mother's worth $4 billion and his uncle's worth another $4 billion. And I'm really serious about this. These are the friends I have, unfortunately. I can't help that. I'm not a gold digger. The mother is threatening him and the sister that she's going to give it to charity. $4 billion. I don't understand. Her great-grandfather, actually more than great-grandfather, was the one who created the wealth. Do you think that he would be happy with the hard work that he did, that she's just going to give it away? No. So you need to protect the future generations of what they're capable of and what kind of mistakes they're capable of. But you have to remember, it's a simple method. You don't have to be a millionaire to do this. You could have a couple $100,000 and you could have one grandchild, let's say. The point is that it's up to you to preserve that wealth. And in order to do that, you have to go to a good company such as Northern Trust. Tell them what you want. You want a private foundation, not a trust. There's a good reason for that. Because with a trust, the heirs, when you die or you go brain dead and you can't manage it, they could actually liquidate it. Whereas a private foundation is a little harder. Luxembourg and Belize, a U.S. judge does not have jurisdiction over a foreign entity. And those two countries have a constitution that protects those trusts and private foundations, those entities. And when I say entity, in that country, it's more like an LLC, a corporation. That's what a trust is in a private foundation. And so that's why I advise you, do not create the private foundation in America. Don't do it. You want to create a rock solid private foundation. And this is part of asset management, risk management. So you're capable of making the $1 million, right? 500,000 over your lifetime, but it's up to you to preserve it. What happens when you go brain dead? Because you got hit by a car and you can't think for yourself. Well, what if you were married to Joan Crawford? Or what if you're married to Leona Helmsley? Or just monstrous people like Will Smith's wife, the narcissist, or Prince Harry's wife, Meghan Markle, another narcissist. You could guarantee you they're going to liquidate, take everything away from you because they have power of attorney over you. And you will wake up one day, God bless you, and realize that you have nothing left. That's dangerous. Or what happens if you were driving drunk and you go into a coma? That's even more dangerous because the person that you hit and killed, their family, is going to sue you and going to take everything away from you. Because you need an attorney that could cost a couple $100,000. So scary to deal with that. Well, if you created a private foundation and you got sued, they can't touch your private foundation. These are all methods on asset protection, and you have to really consider this, because if you don't, you will not have wealth, even in the same generation. And as I outlined, you need to take responsibility now. Otherwise, you will have nothing. So remember, a private foundation in Luxembourg or Belize, the company that could do it for you is Northern Trust. And remember, those of you who have son-in-laws or daughter-in-laws who are lawyers, and you ask them for advice, do you actually think that they're going to tell you this is a good idea. They're not going to do that because you're protecting your daughter and your son against them if they sue for divorce. Or let's say you have a son such as Harry, Prince Harry, and his wife, the monster, in 20 years, if they're still married. What happens if she starts taking over responsibility of doing the bills and stuff? For example, my sister took over doing accounting for my parents in 1990s. And she did a disaster. Well, sometimes even your own sister or brother you can't trust. And they'll take everything away from you. But if you put in your private foundation the document called a constitution, and that's what I call it, but that's not the real name, you need to put in that document what you want done. For example, if you go brain dead, what happens? Who's going to manage that trust? What happens if you didn't put all of these kind of bullet points in your trust, private foundation? That there's no liens allowed. You're not allowed to borrow. If you sell a piece of real estate, you have to buy the same real estate. Okay? It is your responsibility, the trust responsibility, the private foundation, to keep up the real estate, meaning improve it and keep it, in good standards. What do you want done for yourself? If you're in a wheelchair, do you want to go walking every day? Or do you really want to sit in that bed? These are all things that you have to write. And they're really important. And the most important thing is, so once you do pass away and your heirs become the beneficiaries, well, you need to also write what happens. And it's extremely important that you put how much are they allowed per year to take out of it. I would say no more than 1%, honestly. It depends how much the private foundation makes per year, what's the income. But let's say that it's $1 million, okay? Well, I think in real estate, it's pretty easy to make at 7% on your rental properties. So if you have a couple apartment buildings and they're generating income, out of that income, after all the bills are paid, how much do you want your beneficiaries to actually get? And I highly advise you to calculate how much you think they need per year. So you could make the bullet point as, let's say they're allowed to take out no more than a teacher salary. A beginning teacher salary, that's $45,000 a year. How much are they allowed to increase it to? Well, unfortunately, they need to save money. The private foundation needs to save money to continue to grow and to fight against inflation. Those are all things that you have to think about, whether it's $1 million or $1 billion or whatever it is. That is called asset protection. And so you may have been able to make the money, but I could guarantee you're not able to keep it. And that's why my video that you just listened to is really important. You need to tell the attorneys at the trust company, Northern Trust, what they have to do. I want to thank you so much for watching, and I hope my stories bring light into your life and that you don't allow that to happen. Please remember to subscribe to my channel, thumbs up so other people get to see that. And of course, send me messages to the live chat so I could create future videos just for you. Thank you so much.